In honor of Denver's decriminalization of magic mushrooms, doctors of Reddit, what, if any, is your best story of patience on hallucinogenics? Had a friend become impatient with mushrooms once. He took an eighth, and an hour later decided they weren't very strong. So the most logical thing to do would be eat his other eighth. Cut to 2 hours later, and he is parked on top of a parking garage. Tried to drive across town when they kicked in and he immediately realized his duck up. He tried to wait it out, but after being abandoned by everyone else, I wasn't around. No way in hell would I have left the poor guy on 7 grams of shrooms to his own devices, and he decides he needs help. So he calls 911. While on the phone he wants to be as honest as possible. So he tells them about his .22 caliber rifle behind the seat of his truck. Only it comes out as, there's a gun in the car. He says he was tripping and sweating so badly. It was July. The next thing he remembers is hearing a tink 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 and looking up to being surrounded by police. Guns drawn and ready for anything. Friend isn't a danger though, so they get him in an ambulance and give him charcoal to induce vomiting. The rest of the night is a blur for him, and he wakes up cuffed to the bed. They ask him if there's anyone he can call for a ride, and he tells them his mom is a nurse who works on the 2nd floor. Apparently while tripping he kept telling them to go upstairs and get mom, so they all have a chuckle realizing his mom really was upstairs. I'm not a doctor, but I was working as a paramedic at a music festival when we got called to a kid tripping go see on who knows what. The guy had climbed to the top of a portable generator stadium light, so he's 20 feet in the air on a light pole staring into this blazing midnight sun screaming, "I'm a moth, go into the flame." We had several cops, firefighters and myself standing at the base for 30 minutes discussing how to get him down without killing him or us. The entire time a crowd of people on drugs is surrounding us to see how it all plays out. Do we get a ladder truck and try to coax him down? What if he won't go? Do we spray mace up there? What if he falls? All of a sudden this greasy looking janitor walks up, turns off power to the generator, turns on his flashlight OC and aims it at the Mothman. Dude looks at the flashlight on the ground, scambles down and follows it to the medical rent like a puppy about to get a snack. I'm embarrassed that none of us thought about that. Had a woman come into the ED after ingesting some PCP. She was convinced she was dead and kept telling me she didn't get her last rites. At one point she stripped off all her clothes and shat the bed. Also mistook me for Jesus at one point. She was freaking out for nearly 24 hours. Deleted 0.5672. This is all nonsense. 89,098. I had a guy who was freaking out thinking he was going to die because he thought he had eaten too many hallucinogenic mushrooms. He went online and saw that sometimes patients are given activated charcoal to soak up the mushrooms in the stomach. Not entirely true BTW. So he goes outside and starts chowing down on charcoal briquettes that he has in his garage for grilling. After about a dozen he realizes, holy it, I'm eating charcoal briquettes. Now he is really freaking out, so he grabs his dog, as he thinks he is never coming back to his house, and drives himself to the ED. He parks out front, walks into Tridge with the pup, black charcoal all over his face and hands, and says, I need a doctor and someone to watch my dog when I die. I had a patient who had taken an ungodly amount of Benadryl in a failed suicide attempt. A lot of people think that since it makes you drowsy, a bunch of it might be able to kill them in their sleep. Instead of killing them though, Benadryl basically gives you absolutely terrifying hallucinations for like 24 hours or more and then leaves you with the worst multi-day hangover you have ever had in your life. He would not stop yelling and screaming about that damn cat poking its head out of the ceiling tiles every single time I left the room. He also had short bursts of thinking he was covered in bugs and I would find him stripped naked and yelling into the wall. I'm an anesthetist. During a C-section the epidural seemed to not fully be working and the patient was feeling pain, so we were forced to give ketamine. Ketamine has many effects and one of which is profound pain blocking, analgesia. It's safe to use in this case because it won't stop the baby from breathing like morphine or fentanyl would. Ketamine also causes hallucinations, like severe hallucinations. Patient stopped screaming from pain and began screaming from the dragons. Oh it. Oh it. AHHH. Get them away while being totally pain-free and comfortable. It was not in a terrified way but more of an excited I can't believe it kind of way. When the baby came out and began crying it turned to what in the duck is that? Oh my god. That lasted a solid 20 minutes. Edit. Thanks for the gold. First gold coin ever. I'm a doctor. Not a great story. But I had a kid come into ED after taking some mushrooms at a bush doof and then feeling weird. We told him it was probably the drugs that he took. It hadn't occurred to him they might be linked. In my town though, the great majority of drug-related presentations are from meth. And they aren't pretty. We get meth-induced heart attacks, meth-induced seizures, meth-induced motor vehicle accidents, meth-induced sexual violence, and my personal favorite, meth-induced dehillery where a patient is being a D-head in the community, and the police can't take them to the watch house so they come to hospital instead. I've been spat on, punched, kicked and called every name under the sun by meth-influenced patients. I've seen tiny psychotic women requiring 4 security guards and 4 police officers to restrain so that we can sedate them for their own safety. Meth is not good, kids. Edit. A bush doof is like a rave in the bush. Sorry for the confusion. First person to comment. This thread will turn into not a doctor but I guarantee it. When I was a medical student, I saw a guy high as balls on PCP. I was working with a tiny little Asian chick who was a PGY3 resident, and when we walked in the room, this giant naked white dude high as hell sees her and screams that she was the devil or something. Guy lunges at her, and the cop in the room promptly slams him onto the bed. I try to help like any med student working in the field they wanna match in, and I swing around behind the guy, who's actively winning the MMA match with the cop, and grab him into a chokehold. Excellent bedside manner was a comment I got on my slip that day. I pin him for a femtosecond before he realizes he's crispy as it on that good old fencyclidine, and he springs his upper body forward, swinging me over the back of the bedseat right onto his lap. It took me like 5 seconds to realize what happened. I nope right out of there right before the police tased him into oblivion. Hours later he was asking us rather politely for some orange juice with all 4 limbs restrained. I am a medic. Was working a concert in Chicago at Northerly Island a few years back for Fish Fest. Get a call for a male with his face in the ground. Find a shirtless 20-something-year-old with his pant undone and digging his face into the sand. I get next to the guy and tap his shoulder. Say, sir, do you know what's going on? Are you okay? To which he responds in the most classic stoner voice, do you know what's going on, man? And digs his face back in the sand with the stoniest of smiles you can imagine. We coax him out of the sand pit and he tells us he took 10. Just 10. Couldn't remember what of. Just 10. And honestly 10 is bad number of anything. Lol. 10 tabs of acid. 10 grams of weed. 10 grams of mushrooms. 10 shots. 10 heroines please. So we let him sit in the drunk tank with the rest of the tripped out goons. God bless their trippy little hearts. Nurse here. Used to work the night shift in a very small, rural ED in North Carolina. We had a couple in their 20s get picked up the local police. They were found in their car stopped on the train tracks looking very lost and confused. They had somehow made it from Raleigh and were attempting to get to the beach. We don't know exactly when they decided to take the LSD. So they're brought into the ED for an eval before they're let go. This being rural NC. No one had a clue about how to handle this type of situation. We basically gave them IV fluids, put them on cardiac monitors, and tried not to stimulate them too much. They were extremely polite, and since I was the closest in age to them and had some experience with recreational drugs, I did my best to engage them. As I was starting an IV on the male partner, I asked how he was feeling. Very safe, he replied. His pupils were as wide as saucers. I miss that job sometimes. Fun fact, in the UK magic mushrooms are classed as a Class A drug, for some reason, which is the same category as heroin and crack sugar. As a nurse, patient came in running in the ER asking for a blood transfusion cause he believed that vampire bit his neck. Patient had no any visible marks or scars, held him down for a while and asked him to calm down. He was so frightened that he asked for garlic to keep the vampires away. Eventually he calmed down and walked out on his own with no problem. Hope that you're reading this. I wanna take what you're taking. I'm a doctor now, but before that I volunteered as a transporter. I had just taken a patient from the emergency department to the CT scan room. An announcement came on saying code strong pediatric emergency department security was needed in the PEDS ED. This is usually a parent causing a problem. You just shake your head and hope security does its job. Suddenly I saw a teenage kid in a hospital gown sprint past the door of the CT room, flailing his arms and screaming. I looked out the door and at that moment this skinny 14-year-old teenager was tackled, more like speared, by one of our very large, former linebacker security guard. Kid goes down wailing and they control him. I sort of slinked back into the room as if nothing happened. I later heard through the grapevine that the kid had done so much acid he was freaking out. Parents had taken him to the hospital to get help, but he had other plans and escaped out but not far. In a busy urban ED, one unkempt looking man with altered mental status sits calmly and tiredly in a bed along the wall in the hallway. As I walk by, he grabs me, with a worried look on his face, and says in the most classic stoner voice, "Hey, man, why does the time on that clock keep changing?" Me, "That's what it's supposed to do." Patient, "Ooh yeah." Laughs. Still one of my most memorable encounters. I was at culinary school in fish fabrication class and we did a demo tasting one morning and a kid got hallucinogenic fish poisoning. At least that's what our chef and the ER surmised. He said he started to see red. Literally everything was red. Raised his hand and asked the chef for help. The chef, thinking the kid was hungover, berated him a little before sending him off to get help. He was okay though. Why would you ask doctors? The vast majority of people who take hallucinogens never see a doctor while intoxicated. Nephew a doctor. So here we go. Kid 16-17 walks in and is totally convinced there is an alligator actively eating his arm. He's screaming but his arm is both there and with no alligator eating it. I can only imagine what drugs he was on. Physician here. I have not seen anyone on mushrooms, at least not that I knew of, in the hospital. The drug testing for them is actually relatively difficult and not standardized, or at least it wasn't when I was training. I have seen people whacked out of their minds on PCP. We had a patient strapped down to a bed in 4-point restraints. This was actually pretty common with some of the violently psychotic patients in Philadelphia where I trained. I watched the guy somehow shake the bed to the point where he was able to stand up and waddled forward still attached to the bed in his restraints. As a medical student at the time, I just go out of there and let the professionals work that case. Patients on PCP will shatter glass, break bones, etc. and feel nothing until they come down. I have also seen a patient with Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. These patients will disturb you. Lesch-Nyhan is an enzyme disorder which culminates in extreme neurologic symptoms. These patients are classically known to self-mutilate, gouge their own eyes out, etc. The patient I briefly came into contact with would attempt to bite anyone the moment they walked by or got too close. It was super disturbing because it was completely without malice. This patient was also in 4-point restraints. I was actually interviewing shadowing for a job in a trauma dept. A patient came in after having a gigantic log roll over him. He was a lumberjack, trucker, either way he had an open ankle fracture which means the bone is sticking out. He was obviously in a lot of pain. In order to set the ankle, he was given some fentanyl. I don't remember the dose. He went from literally screaming in pain to literally singing about having a pizza party. I'll never forget we're gonna to have a pizza party. Pizza for everybody. Not a mushroom story, but had taken a couple hits of acid early in the evening and went to watch a movie with some friends. They ended up driving and had to head another way. So I told them I'd just hop a bus home, was waiting for the bus. And while I was fully tripping yet, it was definitely making things burn a little brighter. The bus stop is at one end of the transitway and it was about 20-30 minute wait for the bus at the point in the night. Eventually I convinced myself I was trapped at the bus stop like Neo in the Matrix Revolutions was at the subway station. After an excruciating 30 minutes, which felt infinitely longer, the bus comes, and go home to ride out the rest of the trip watching something on my tablet. So I loaded up a whole playlist of Full Metal Alchemist since I was watching it for the first time. For anyone that has seen it, it was the episode where Alphonse faced off against Pride. I don't know how it happened, but at the beginning of one episode it recapped the past episode. So I thought I had already seen it. So I skipped to the next one, saw the recap and had no clue what happened. So I go back to the previous episode. I did this for an hour. Eventually I gave up and put on Batman, the animated series, while the wallpaper melted. Always found the trick with hallucinogens was to just go with the flow since it was all in my head. Until I somehow ducked up a sequential playlist when all I had to do was keep watching. I also went to a deserted coffee shop at 4 AM and waited 20 minutes for service, before leaving $10 by the cash and walking out with a tin of coffee grounds.